Okay, very good. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Vicinity podcast with me, Henry Gidman.
And me, Julie Grail.
And we are back for another installment, thanks to your wonderful feedback. And for those people that said we went on for too long, we are going to endeavour to keep these shorter now and break up the topics a little bit. So this is likely to be the first in a multi-part series on the question of what makes a good bid. Now, I suspect probably all of our listeners will know exactly what a bid is, but just in case someone is new to a bid or they've strayed onto this podcast, I will briefly outline it in 30 seconds. So start the timer,
Okay,
Julia.
I'll keep you to it.
Okay, we'll get the introduction out the way. So bids are geographical areas where businesses have come together to create an organization that will invest in local improvements, services, and initiatives to benefit the area and ultimately the economic outcomes of those businesses. These services should ideally be in addition to those services provided by the local and public and other public services, as we discussed in our previous podcast.
Yeah, podcast 2. Let's just name check that one. Where's the line? Everyone loved that quiz.
A bid will operate for a set term, typically 5 years, and to establish or renew a bid, the businesses in the area vote for it. If the bid is approved, it has to be the majority of the businesses that vote in favour, both by number and total rateable value. There are now many different types of bids: retail and city centre, tourism and destination, industrial and business park, and we're seeing property owner bids, coastal bids, accommodation bids. But the model is essentially the same, benefiting our places of this great country by collective action and investing in services for places and communities. So that's what we're talking about. Now, bids have existed in this country since 2004, when Julie set up the first one in Kingston.
Oh, you make me sound ancient. Yeah.
So the best person to ask this question, what makes a good bid? What are your characteristics of a good bid?
Yeah, and I like your introduction about it's about collective action, because it is about collective action. What we're trying to do here is make a difference in a place by utilising the will and the knowledge and the expertise and the concern and interest of businesses, and pool all of that together in a place for the benefit of those businesses. And so I talk to bids often, to teams, to their boards, to their additional partners, about what good looks like. And I've sort of created 6 characteristics, and they are basically representative. It's not our money, it's businesses' money. We have to be absolutely clear we are representing the businesses that are paying us. We have to have integrity, because it's not our money, it's other people's money. And often it's 500, 600, 700 businesses' money. So the level of integrity that we carry always in everything we do has to be absolutely paramount. Evidence-based decisions, really, really important. We don't just shoot from the hip. We think through what we're doing. We analyse what we're doing and why, because again, it's not our money, it's other people's money. Visible. Visibility is a kind of interesting one, because we need to be visible from the perspective of delivery, so that businesses who are investing know we are using their money well, but also from our perspective as bid teams and bid boards, we have to be willing to be visible and open to challenge and question and feedback. Responsiveness kind of follows from that. It's not our money, it's other people's money. So we need to be willing to respond to feedback, questions, queries, and continually have that open two-way dialogue. And finally, and this is, I think, for me, so important, because we're not mainstream organisations, we need to be innovative. We mustn't just do what others did or do. We must continually try and pioneer new approaches, new sort of service areas, new projects, and be innovative using tech, and be sure that, and ultimately from those 6, I say we're using kind of well-measured bravery. So we're not just stick in the mud organisations that become mainstream. We're continually reinventing ourselves for the needs of each term. And as you said at the beginning, typically 5 years. The legislation doesn't allow us to have a term more than 5 years. I was really keen to build that into the legislation at the beginning because it's so important we continually benchmark what we're doing and benchmark what's needed so that we're always refreshing ourselves. So well-measured bravery is what we should be about.
It's an interesting one. I've heard people talking recently about should there be a 10-year term, and I think the thinking behind that is having a longer period of time to have a run at something, to maybe tackle bigger projects. But from what you're saying there, how do you think about longer terms?
Yeah, at 10 years into bids, there was a big review of bids by government that I worked very closely on, and that was in 2014. And there are quite a few issues that we picked up at that time, and term length was one of them. And there was a desire from some locations, the more advanced locations, to get a longer term at renewal. The terms being discussed at that point was 7 or 8 years. There was nervousness about going to 10. For me, I'm not convinced a term longer than 5 years is the right thing, because you get further and further away from that key point of being accountable constantly. And interestingly, when we had the Americans come over to meet us and talk with us, sort of 5 years into bids, 2008-9, they started the conversation going, "Oh my God, I can't do the American accent. You're crazy. Why have you got these, 5-year terms? We can just run and run." By the end of the 2 days we spent with them, they're like, "That's so good that you've got that 5-year term, and it keeps those checks and balances in place." So I'm not really an advocate of longer terms, but when we talked about it back then, the thing that I kept pushing was, if we were going to have longer terms at a renewal, it had to then ensure that we linked in one of my big concerns of kind of regulatory shortfall, that is, there's no turnout threshold. And if you were having a long term, you'd have to have a turnout threshold in the ballot.
I think Americans are struggling with concepts of democratic accountability at the moment. Anyway, so
yeah, let's not stray to that.
I'm just thinking about your characteristics there, and I feel like there's probably an acronym that you can make of the letters, but I'm not going to try and come up with one under the pressure of recording.
That's the point, and I haven't done that, but there probably is. We've got it's like countdown. We've got enough vowels and consonants to make it work. I'm better at the numbers game on countdown there. Anyway,
I can empathise with that desire to have a longer term. I hear and see the stress and strains it puts on a bid team going through a ballot process, in addition to trying to provide the services that you've put in to your plan. So I understand why they're doing it. The thing I always think about with that is, these are small teams of a small number of people. And if you lose that bid manager in a 10-year term, you're so dependent on the caliber and competence of a small number of people that you wouldn't have an opportunity to vote to kick them out if they strayed from good governance and standards. Which kind of brings me into the arguments often levied against bids would be things like lack of democratic and financial accountability, lack of transparency, poor governance. I mean, how do you think about those kind of challenges that these small bid teams are facing?
Yeah, and actually, lots of the things that are levied by those that are against bids or anti-bids, I absolutely agree with them. I can't align fully with all of those anti-bid businesses, because some of them just don't like the concept. And I do agree with the concept. I think the concept is absolutely right if we do it well, but I don't agree with doing it badly. So we should have good democratic practices in place. We should absolutely be concerned about transparency and accountability, and we should absolutely be ensuring our bid boards are working with really good quality governance practices. And what I often say when I talk to a bid, particularly when I meet a bid for the first time, and often I never intended to do loads of ballots, but what I ended up doing is I whenever I've worked with a bid at a point, they get to renewal and they then go, can you help us with renewal? And inevitably, to do renewal, you then have to relook at yourself and be sure that you're fit for purpose and that you're correct. So at that point, I'll often say, you have to, inherent to everything, you have to believe that it's about honesty first, and hand on heart, the things that you're doing and the things that you've delivered and the things that you're presenting and the way that you're doing it, can you look at the whites of the eyes of the businesses who pay you and believe that it's right? That doesn't mean they have to agree with you necessarily, but you absolutely have to hand on heart believe you are doing good practices and you're doing them well. And for those businesses, do you remember the first podcast we did? We talked about the billing process, and I was talking about the data and the accuracy of the data and how important it is that we absolutely, as bids, know that data, and how alarming it is to me that many bids say, oh, no, that's not our problem. That's the local authority. We don't know the data. You have to know every business that pays you. They are your customers.
Yeah.
You have to know who they are, where they are. You don't just talk to them at ballot. You talk to them all the time. So many of those things that you've just named, yeah, I agree. We absolutely need to work on making those things happen.
Yeah, we should definitely talk about data, because I think it starts and ends with data. I mean, Andrew Cooper in Leeds, who's been a big supporter of Solomon that then became Vicinity, he often says your next ballot begins the day after your last one has ended. And having the data that backs up what you've done, what you've delivered, is a key point, addressing accountability, establishing trust. But even on a more simple level, who are your businesses?
Yeah.
Who are the people within those businesses? Who is your liable party?
Yeah.
And keeping that up to date. But if we just go back to perhaps the relationship to start with between central government and bids. Now, this is enshrined in law. Brief history. Bids were introduced in the Local Government Act 2003, and then we had it rolled out through the different countries in the United Kingdom. So you had 2004 setting up the Business Improvement District regulations in England, establishing rules on the voting process, on the levy collection process, on bid renewals, rights to challenge, and then essentially 2005 in Wales, 2007 in Scotland. Well, Scotland, a few different points requiring at least 25% voter turnout for a bid ballot, but essentially mirroring each other as they rolled out, is my understanding. What is central government's role when it comes to bids? And with some of your understanding of that regulatory environment, what are the shortcomings? What are the pitfalls?
When we set up bids, we had a lot of very, very detailed dialogue with government, with the civil servants, and in the first sort of 5, 6, 7 years, some really, really good detailed kind of challenging conversations, which was great. And during that phase, they encouraged some drafting of guidance. I was the author of that guidance, as the author of the local authority guide. None of it's been updated for ages, and nothing is ever then detailed. So one of my concerns now, kind of challenges now in a way, is writing the legislation and the regulations was about being as non-prescriptive as possible, so that it left to local places the ability to kind of design in their own way, and that's all good. But we do need some checks and balances in place, and we do need some clarity on sort of interpretation of, to use the name again, on where the line is. And to give a couple of examples from a central government perspective, the notification to the Secretary of State, which is the first regulatory trigger, is 84 days before the notice to the local authority that you want to run a ballot. And that's meant to be an early warning sign to the business community that a ballot's coming. And that was designed well, and we had that in a timeline that we worked through with civil servants, and that was all good. But in practice, despite me and many others arguing for years that it should be, that notification to Secretary of State is never made public. So how does a business know that's gone in? It's an early warning trigger, but only if the local place is overtly and transparently telling its business community it's preparing for a ballot, would they know about it. So they don't make that public, and therefore that becomes a bit of a meaningless trigger, which frustrates me.
What are the consequences of that?
The consequences are there are businesses in places that, good example, I'll avoid using names to not be inappropriate. The budget hotel sector, for example, rarely has a capacity to vote locally. They want to vote at head office. Not many vote at head office now. We might come back to that point. But the budget hotel sector, they've got policy people in head office who want to access information about votes and the dates. They don't know how to do it. They can't get it. And it became apparent in relation to the accommodation bids, which has been this, gradual sort of mission creep recently. And they were saying, but we didn't have the capacity to vote. We didn't know about it. We didn't see anything coming. How do we find out? Where's the register? To which I was saying, well, there isn't a public register. There is a register held in government because we all dutifully put our notification, but that's not made public and it should be.
Okay.
They also flagged their concerns about dynamic pricing models. For them means they can't capture that voluntary tourist charge and accommodation bids, but that's a separate conversation for a separate day. So there's some ramifications to that.
Essentially, it's starting out making those values of transparency from the very beginning, if we can make that public.
Yeah, absolutely. The kind of next piece of that, then, from a central government point of view, is I've long said from the beginning, along with many others, the challenge process to the sector estate, if there are problems, if there are material irregularities, should then be made public. So how do we ever learn that something was correct practice or incorrect practice if a challenge is submitted to government by an aggrieved business community and it's upheld or not? How do we ever learn what was correct or not correct if it's never published? And it's all a little bit cloak and dagger because no one actually wants to admit they've had a challenge. And the business communities in some cases are quite public about their concerns, but you never see the detail. You only see the detail if you're on the inside of a challenge. And I'll give you some examples. In the very early days, I'll turn it the other way around. Whenever I speak to bids, I say, in the ballot process, you absolutely should never have your bid team handling ballot papers, period. And some people go, oh, yeah, absolutely, morally, that's absolutely right. And others go, why? And I'll talk through morally why you shouldn't, but why, who says? Where's that written down? And the answer is, well, actually, it's not written down, but I know it's there because I know one of the very early bids, I can name this one, Coventry, in the very early days, was challenged, and I know just from knowing through the grapevine that it was found that they were incorrect in handling ballot papers and that was not correct practice, but it didn't actually influence their result sufficiently, so their result was upheld. But I only know that through history. Nobody coming into the bid industry now will ever find that written down anywhere. So quite rightly challenge me on, well, who says that? And there are lots like that. There are lots of issues that one of the other things I always talk to people about when we go into the ballot process, you've got to logically think through what's democratic, what is appropriate. And one of the situations that occurs is you have the ability to say, it's a postal ballot that has its own problems. It's a postal ballot, but actually a lot of places will say, but can we have a ballot box somewhere in the heart of the town so that actually it's easier to be sure that goes in? And if it's referenced in the notice of ballot, yes, they can. And a local authority needs to manage that really tightly. But then I'll always say to people, okay, so if you've got a ballot box and a postal ballot, and it's being run by one of the outsourced contractors, which they often are, about 3/4 are now, when does 5 p.m. on ballot day kick in? Because 5 p.m. on ballot day is when the outsourced provider needs to receive all their ballot papers, and anything beyond 5 p.m. is late. But is that 5 p.m. in the ballot box in the location as well? Because that's different. And if the answer is yes, it is actually 5 p.m. on the day in that ballot boxes, how do we then prove? And whenever I'm involved in this process, I always insist who's managing that ballot box has to prove by date time stamping the opening of that ballot box at 5 p.m. on that day. Otherwise, it's really open to fraud, isn't it? And it just shouldn't. But where's any of this written down? It's not written down anywhere. We've just developed this through a moral compass and going, what's democratically correct? And the trouble is, if you're not that way inclined, you're not going to do those things. That's not really good, is it?
I don't know if this is a good example, but is this unusual for government, because I think about HMRC and tax rules, and they will write the rules, but they won't help you to interpret those rules. It's up to you to have independent advisors, consultants, who then interpret the rules and advise you on how to meet those rules. And if you rang up HMRC and said, I'm doing this, is this okay? They would say, oh, well, I can't possibly tell you that. We can't give you that kind of guidance and advice. Is that the same thing that's happening here? Or
well, that's quite a good example. In a way it is, but only if the backstop, i.e. the government department, or in this case, the local authority that has the statutory oversight of the bid process, is only if the local authority is actually doing its duty. And in many cases, lots of local authorities, don't get me wrong, lots of local authorities do this excellently and work really well with us and are really rigid quite properly about things. I do worry about just how many local authorities let go of their responsibilities, think by outsourcing the ballot to a third party means they're no longer the ballot holder. They're legally the ballot holder throughout, and don't take those rigid responsibilities seriously enough. And so then who's going to manage if we do that, where's the backstop? It isn't there often. And again, that frustrates me. And I'll often sit with a bid and I'll say, no, you need to do this. And they'll say, yeah, but why? Who's going to see? That's not the point, is it? Somebody should be looking. And if somebody isn't looking, you should be looking to make sure that they are. Yeah, exactly. So I always say, consider worst case scenario, consider a challenge. I'll always talk about a challenge. I'll always say, what would be picked up in a challenge. And if a challenge was, with every bid I work with, I say you have to assume a challenge is going to be submitted. And if it is, are we squeaky clean? Have we done everything correctly? And generally, the bids that I work with, they get into that mindset and they completely agree. And you then work in a really, really open, transparent way. But worryingly, local authorities are often not looking. And so if you're not coming at it from that perspective, there's probably quite a lot of poor practice out there.
I often think about that when people get caught out for sort of sending messages they shouldn't have done to people. I think, why are you sending those in the first place? Always act as if something you're sending could be leaked, and and just conduct yourself in that way, and it makes life much easier. And you're not having to conceal things or hide things. It's just that's just the way you're acting. So we can complain, we can moan, we can put these suggestions to central government, and change may be forthcoming and it may be slow. In the meantime, what's the solution? How do we, as people in the bid industry, how do we self-manage?
I think we go back to those characteristics. We need to take responsibility for us delivering well and properly, and we need to take responsibility for our requisite local authority delivering well. And sometimes I find myself challenging a local authority and telling them how they should behave and how they should challenge us to make sure we're both on the same page. Because again, I was with a bid team yesterday doing some training work for their forthcoming ballot. I won't name them, but they'll probably know who they are when I say this. And we talked about, there were various different adjectives came out. One of them was, we work in quite a military way when we start preparing for ballot, because you have to be really, really focused on all of the detail and be sure that everything you're doing is correct. But equally, you have to be sure the other party is correct, because it doesn't matter where the failure was. If a challenge is upheld, we've all lost. So it's in our interests to make sure everybody does the right thing, even if it feels like it's a bit heavy-handed on our part. We have to challenge a local authority to come to the table at the right time in the right way. And we have to always have challenge in the backstop of our brains. And again, it comes back to that, for me, morally, this is not our money. This is business's money. We have to act. They're not our organisations. We have to act. I often say to bidsmen, in particular when I talk to a board, the kind of analogy I get them to think about is the role is managing a levy payer's investment portfolio. It's a joint bank account for the place, and none of that money is ours. So we have to have checks and balances in place.
And we should definitely come on to governance. I think we'll keep that for the next podcast. Let's keep to this question of how do we get good? How do we make ourselves good? How do we ensure that we are being representative, that we're acting with integrity, that we're making evidence-based decisions, that we are visible, responsive, and innovative?
Yeah, and so much of this, like you can look at all of the detail of what we do and the types of projects we do and the processes associated with each of the projects and managing our GDPR obligations and everything. But actually, I think it's bigger than that. I think it's, let's step back a stage and say, how do we make ourselves good, irrespective of what we're doing? That's all about that honesty, integrity, and engagement. And the point you made earlier about you start your next ballot as you finish
Mm,
one. Engagement is throughout the 5 years, not at a point where you need to start worrying about whether someone's going to vote for you or not. You have to
yep.
talk to them all the time. And I mean, I often, and I kind of terrify people at times because I do understand the scale. And they say, don't you understand the scale of what we're doing? Yes, I do, because I've done this firsthand too. And I do it firsthand. Um, there's a series of sort of critical numbers that I like to talk to people about. And the first one is consultation to ballot. When you do your consultation, consultation doesn't mean little toe in the water to kind of say we're doing something. It means 100% coverage. Everyone that's going to have a vote needs to have communication. And we're not doing that because we want to tick a box. We're doing that because it's their money we're going to spend. So what do they want us to spend the money on? What are their issues? Now, I'm not stupid enough to sit here and say that's really easy, because it's not. It's really, really difficult. And one of the reasons why, and so I say 100% consultation in terms of broadcast, in terms of communication, attempt to reach, but actually about 60% feedback, because it is really hard to get feedback from certain sectors in certain ways. Some businesses are just happily complicit in the bid model and actually trust you to do things. Some of the bigger businesses say, no, we're okay with it. You just, we'll have some involvement, but crack on. Others have huge amounts of involvement, and that's great. And you want to get the level of getting under the skin of the place and the issues per sector and the issues geographically of where we can make that difference, where it would be worth spending the money. And we do that by loads and loads of comms. And,
Mm,
we do that, it comes back to the data. We do that by holding quality data, using facilities that allow us to do that. I mean, I think Vicinity do that, don't they? Having a really quality data set that allows us to continually work through the various different channels of comms, the various different frequencies, various different sort of, tones of voice for different sectors. And we're not telling people some things and not telling other people. We're being intelligent about how we communicate. The way you communicate with a small independent business, far and away, is you walk in the door.
yep.
You go face to face. You see the whites of their eyes. You create a rapport with them, and you go, "What's your issues?" And actually, we often talk about with bid teams, particularly when you've got new people in the team. We had a new person in the team yesterday, and some people are really naturally able to do this, and some people are absolutely terrified by it. The starting point is, it's not what we want to tell them, it's what we need them to tell us. You need to go in with a hook that says, why are they going to want to talk to us? What is it we can do for them? And you go with a hook that's, often it is a problem first. They've got an ASB
Yeah.
problem, they've got a homelessness problem, they've got, cleansing issues, they've got nighttime economy issues. You go in on that one and go, right, how can we help you? What's the issues? How can we understand all of that? And then on the back of all that, you go, great. Can we get your contact details? Can we talk to you about this? Can we introduce you to those people? Who else in your business deals with, X, Y, Z? That's how you build up this huge kind of network and hierarchy of relationships. And for every one business, you might have a whole load of different relationships. And then when it gets to ballot again, you hone it down on who's the voter. But we do that at loads and loads of different levels and loads of different comms.
Mm, it's so true. I've been speaking recently with a bid manager who's got a difficult task ahead of him, where he's come into an existing bid, but it's gone through a difficult time, and he's effectively starting from scratch. He's got a list of businesses provided by a local authority.
Right.
We can help him by checking that against what the VOA says. So he starts with a list of businesses.
Yeah.
But the first job is understanding who are the people that are behind those businesses. And there isn't a magic data set that we can plug into that.
No, but your scenario planning tool's really good now, where you can pull out the patch to make sure at least you've got all the levy payers as businesses, even if you haven't got the person.
Absolutely. Because that's the first challenge is the the delay in getting the data from VOA to local authority systems, and then to the bid, well, actually, we can cut some of that out, get it direct from the VOA.
Yeah.
We can plot that on a map. You can change your boundaries on a map, and that will tell you who are the businesses in a place, what are the categories. It won't tell you who the people are.
Yeah.
And then that becomes the first job. And that consultation period is really interesting because you want to be collecting what it is people are asking you for, to make evidence-based decisions. And where are you going to collect it? And how are you going to collect which person said what? And if you don't have a tool in your pocket, like you do with Vicinity, where you can record the interactions, what people are asking for you, what you're doing for people in one place, I don't know how people manage without it.
Well, and those people, they inevitably have low level of engagement. They may have, therefore, low level of insight into the projects that are required, and almost exclusively then have low turnout at ballot, which, and going on to kind of the next stage of beyond the consultation when you get to ballot, I always say to bids, we need to reach 100% of voters all the way through the campaign. And it doesn't matter which way they want to vote democratically, we need to talk to all of them. And actually, the challenge for me about no voters is not whether you talk to them or not, is of course we talk to them. Why do they not support the bid? What is it about the bid they don't like? Have we just not framed it right? There have been locations in the past, it's been really interesting, where I've had people from a no campaign contact me and said, oh God, could you just help us out? Because we're not anti-bids. We're just anti this one. We don't like what they've developed because they haven't listened to us. They haven't communicated with us. They're not, what they're proposing to deliver is not what we need. Sometimes, more regularly, that's small businesses, but not exclusively. And actually, that's I think always the challenge is when we look at, say, another great bit of Vicinity is when you go to the ballot dashboard, and you can see your colour scheme of who have we got categorised as green at the moment, who's at red and who's in between, and the various different sort of levels. The red one is the one I'll look at first. Who's in there and why? Let's understand why they're there.
And what's their significance? Because some of those people could be one person who has multiple votes, or one person who is responsible for a lot of RB. And being able to understand that from the data quite quickly and easily is important.
And sometimes, and there are, again, I'm not stupid enough to sit here and say we can convince everybody and convert everybody. Of course we can't. I can't fully align myself with those anti-bid people because some of them just do not like bids, and I do like bids. But generally, it's born out of frustration of process and integrity of organisation and stuff rather than concept, or just complete ignorance. They just don't know, therefore they're going to vote no. And when you talk through and kind of immerse yourself, and what I'll always say to a bid when you're in the campaign, if anything negative you hear, jump on it, understand it, talk to them about it. Why is it negative? What is it? Have we misrepresented what we're going to do? Have we misread what's needed? Or is there something else going on that we didn't understand? We should be democratic in the way we have those comms. And that's scary to some people, but it shouldn't be. It should be the right way.
It's and I don't think she'll mind me mentioning her, but Alexa at Reading had managed to predict her result to, I think, within 2%. Because her and a team had been using the system to record who was likely to vote yes, who was likely to vote no. And I hope that takes a lot of the stress out of the ballot process, because you know what's going to happen if you've done that work in advance.
And I'd say that's really good to hear. At Reading, a great team, and I know Alexa well. But lots of the good bids will be in that space, that they will literally forecast the result virtually to the final number. And so you go to bed on the Thursday evening. It's normally a Thursday evening, knowing whether you've won or not, even though it's all on guesstimate. It's on really educated guesstimate. And the Friday, your only outcome is, were we on the money, or is it 1% either side or something? The frustrating bit, coming back to the turnout point that I've referenced a couple of times, I really, really dislike hearing a bid say, we've done brilliantly and we got 95%. And they've only given one metric, 95% by number of votes. We still have to have percentage by rateable value. But more important beyond those two, is what was the turnout.
Mm.
Because 95%, when you've only had 20% turnout, is utterly rubbish, diabolical, not acceptable. You referenced the Scotland regulation, but 25% turnout, which was kind of good. But I've always advocated we should have a turnout threshold in the regulations. This is the one single thing, if we could change the regulations, this is the one single thing I'd change. And I always, with every team I work with, insist that our target turnout as an absolute minimum is 50%. Now, to the anti-lobby, they may go, well, that's not much. Oh my God, you've got no idea
It's
how.
more than the current average.
Well, yeah, but it is, but quite properly, because it should be, because the current average is dragged down by the terrible ones. But there's a load of mechanics of the ballot process that's really difficult, and so it is quite hard to get a very high turnout, and you are dealing with very high numbers. But I advocated long ago in the review of bids 10 years ago, as an absolute minimum, legally, we should be on 35%. I know, and some bid managers may be listening, cringing or shouting at the screen or radio, whatever, because they feel nervous about that. If you're a good bid, you shouldn't be nervous about that. You should be able to achieve that. And that's what, again, comes back to that integrity point. We shouldn't run bad organisations. If we can't get that number, we shouldn't be doing it.
So this is how do you create that change? You've got the hard truth of you need to get out there and speak to people. You need to do that groundwork. You need to set high standards for that turnout, right?
Yeah.
Where do you look to for support? Because I'd imagine those shouting at the screen might be people going, it's only me and another person.
Yeah.
And I've got all this stuff to do. What's the angel on your shoulder saying? What's the nice?
And I think it's a really good point about scale, because I remember in the very early days, and I'll take delight in naming her, although she may not listen. I'll tell her to listen. Sarah Porter, who was our first bid manager of Heart of London Business Alliance, as it's called now, that was the first Central London bidder, they were part of our original pilot. She was really, really focused on this kind of absolutely kind of visible integrity piece about touch points constantly through the entire term of the bid. So she had a whole traffic light system in the office from day one, where she insisted that every single business had to have at least one touch point every quarter of every year. Now, some other bid managers at the time were a bit envious, frustrated, cross, because but she's only got small numbers. She had 202 businesses at that time. And yes, 202 is considerably easier than 800. But the moral principle is the same, isn't it? You might, rather than do it quarterly because you've got 600, you do it twice a year. You should certainly, when I first went into Worcester bid, pre-COVID, I challenged them to what level of kind of immersion have you got into your business community? What percentage do you regularly see? How do you know, how many do you know and everything? And I challenged them, because it was on about 650 hereditaments. I challenged them to, as an absolute minimum, know they had a touch point annually, one touch point a year with every single business. They've smashed that out of the park, no problem now, because it's integral to what they do. So my challenge back to those people that say, but this only me, is, but that is the core job. So actually, you've got to change what you do and how you do it if you can't hit that. It sort of comes back to that early point. We had, in the early days of bids, we had some locations, arguing about not wanting to accept a bid and everything. And I remember our dear late Stephen Ashworth, who was our lawyer from Denton's, who did all the early work with us, and he was brilliant at kind of coining simple phrases. And he just said, but hear the noise. If they don't want it, don't give it to them. Move on. And actually, you can get too immersed in the principle of a bid needing to be here. If the business community don't want a bid, don't give them a bid. Like, it's their bid.
Yeah.
We mustn't get caught up, which is why, coming back to the 5-year renewal thing, I think it's really important that we refresh and reboot. And if the community's changed and actually the needs are different and they don't need or want a bid, then don't make them have a bid. We mustn't be corporately committed to always renewing. Now, in practice, the good ones, they're always wanted again, because they've done so many great things, because they really can deliver well if they're good organisations. But we shouldn't just be caught up in them having to be there.
Scale is a good point, because you say, yes, we're only a small number of people, but you will have I assume, a proportionately lower number of businesses that you need to engage. So as comes with scale is a bigger problem.
Yeah. And also the fact that, going back to my military reference from the team I was with yesterday, it's incumbent on you, even if there's only one of you, to properly think about the army of foot soldiers you've got. And that is your business community, and it is your board. I mean, I remember two ballots.
Utilize your business community as part of your...
Enlist them into, because it's their organisation. And actually, the more smaller independent businesses you've got, the more likely they will galvanise and own it, because they're really active. They want to be active. It's their place. In two ballots ago for Salisbury, we had a fabulous bid board there. They're still fabulous, but back then, which is my first ballot I'd done with them, that got inconveniently postponed by Novichok, actually, just as an aside, which was a challenge that thankfully we haven't had to repeat. But we had a board there led by a super guy who really embraced the concept of they were the army of foot soldiers beyond the staff team, and so were others. And we did a load of training and briefing, and each of them had allocations of businesses they were going to communicate with, and they'd know them through lots of different things. Either they're the neighbour, or they're in the same sector, or they meet in some kind of corporate environment, or indeed their kids are playing rugby at the same place on a weekend. But they just immerse themselves in every line of that database and got out and did the job. So yes, there might be only one bid manager, but galvanise the support of the people that are benefiting. That's what we should be doing. This is a really community up initiative, not top down.
And I look through your list of characteristics and I just think, use the technology.
Yeah, absolutely.
Use the technology, because, and a shameless plug, this is why we do what we do. And if you've got a system where you can quickly record your interactions, who are the right people, actually the system can generate the reports that you need for the board. It can generate the things you need to meet your requirements to be accountable and transparent, all from putting in the activities that you're doing. So it's really important we make that as easy as possible for people, but then that you let the system then help you to do things on the back end of that.
And also linked to that, making the data hold you to account is really important. I'm a real, I hate meetings for meeting's sake. I hate people being ineffective. And I think we need to, work smart and be focused. And when you have those data sets reporting on you all the time, it actually makes you more smart about the time you spend. I don't think people should be going and sitting in meetings just to sit in a meeting. Bid managers sometimes will tell me, particularly smaller places, I'm so busy, I haven't got time to do that. And what I do is say, show me your diary. What are you going to that you shouldn't be going to? What impact do you get out of that meeting? How have you used that? And often they get caught up in going to loads and loads of things, A, not reporting back on those things, and B, not affecting any change. So stop doing those things and be more effective. Turn your job round the other way and make sure the priorities are the priorities of the bid first, not everyone else. You can be really busy fools in bids.
We have a really great example with Southampton, where we create for them an environmental reporting app, but it sends the issues direct to the local authority, but creates a task in Vicinity at the same time, according to the SLA that the bid has with the local authority for any given task. Brilliant. Which means that you get a task which is not just holding you accountable to solving that issue, but is actually you're able to hold the local authority accountable according to the terms of the SLA. And I think things like that is automation, all coming from just reporting an issue into an app.
And as you say, people walk in the streets, as we should be, because they're not just desk jobs. Obviously, there's desk work we have to do, but actually, a lot of what we're doing is being out there, understanding the patch. And anyone walking the streets and entering businesses and having dialogue with people, that needs to be reported and recorded. And through Vicinity, you can do that, as you say, as you're walking along, pressing a button. That's what then drives our process of evidence to then help us decide on spend later. We have to be smart about the time we spend doing things and not just, have an idle wonder.
And also identifying, where haven't you visited? Where are your gaps in your data? We make that as easy as we can for bids to find that and fill it, and look for ways to automate things for them to help. So, yes, a bit of a plug there. But I think we all see the value, especially. I was thinking the other day about the NHS app. I don't know if you've used that.
Yeah.
But actually, you can see your history on
great,
there
isn't it?
of each test or whatever you've had. And I think that's where I'd like to get to with Vicinity, is where a business can see, we already have a sort of an activity timeline report, which a bid can generate and send. But that's what we're aiming for, is a business to be able to see a personalized, individualized report of, here's everything that the bid did for me.
Absolutely.
Hitting those transparency and accountability.
And that's what makes it then, when you do then get to ballot, it shouldn't be an uphill task, because you should have been doing it all the way along. And for every business that pays you and therefore is going to vote again, you should have a whole catalogue of like receipted value for them. These are all the things you've done. Sometimes, I have to say, these are all the things you could have done, but you didn't engage with us from a business community. We've offered it to you, but you didn't use it. That can be quite a challenge at renewal, because business, but I haven't had anything. But you could have done.
Here's all the opportunities
we've told
we gave you.
We've offered it to you. And sometimes you get light bulb moments of businesses. Sometimes it's a change of staff, and they go, God, we didn't realise. Okay, let's crack on now. But the onus is on us to demonstrate what that value is, and then ultimately the business to pick it up.
We should conclude, because I think we've probably gone on longer on our first one than we were expecting to. So I'll start with your 6 characteristics again and repeat them. Representative, integrity, evidence-based decisions, visible, responsive, and innovative. Those are the characteristics which we should aspire to be as business improvement districts, to tackle the challenges that we face, to tackle concerns around transparency, about democratic and financial accountability, the renewal process. And we have a bit of a call to action for central government, should anyone listen. Let's help provide broader guidance. Let's update the guidance that you were involved with those years ago, and look at the voter turnout.
Yeah, absolutely. And ultimately operate in a fashion that leads with moral compass and has well-measured bravery. There's no substitute to looking at the whites of someone's eyes and saying, hand on heart, this is the right thing to do. If you hide behind comms and hide behind data and hide behind the desk, you're not really having that solid, well-measured bravery.
Well-measured bravery. I like it. Julie, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.